Part 2. The Origins and Spread of the Indo-European Languages. The posited ancestral language of all the Indo-European languages was first spoken by the then probably nomadic inhabitants of the steppes in the area just north of the Black Sea. This is now in Ukraine. We have no evidence of this language per se. These people left no writing, although they left behind multiple cultural artifacts and the burial mounds called kurgans. We find traces of this culture and some early agriculture in this area around 6,000 to 8,000 years ago, in the 4th to 5th millennium BCE. Because no physical evidence of the language remains, we can only postulate its existence and reconstruct what it may have sounded like by examining modern and documented extinct languages. This is why we call this language Proto-Indo-European or PIE. Over millennia, the reasonably small number of PIE speakers migrated, or waged wars, or conducted trade with neighboring tribes. They moved in pursuit of food, living spaces, better weather, more land and pasture, and so on. They moved south to Anatolia and the Balkans, to Western and Eastern Europe, to India and the Middle East, taking their local dialects with them. There have been different reasons postulated for the spread. One possible reason is that with the emergence of agriculture, the food supply has become more reliable and therefore the population grew. More people needed more space to farm, so they moved further away from their ancestral places. Colin Renfrew argued that farming dispersals were the primary driver of human migration, and the migration of languages as a result. Aggression and conquest are other possible reasons. When one tribe was conquered by another, the victors either adopted the language of the losers or imposed their language on the losers. Historically, both scenarios are possible, and we will discuss them later in relation to the English language. But in any case, languages came in contact and influenced each other. New words were borrowed, invented, or modified from old ones to refer to the newly encountered phenomena: plants, animals, geographic features, climatic events, and so on. Some indigenous languages were replaced completely and became extinct without leaving a trace of their existence. It is also possible that hybrid languages, creoles, came into being with all the associated processes. Gradually, the dialects diverged further and further from each other, eventually becoming mutually unintelligible and growing into separate but related languages. If PIE emerged somewhere between 6 to 4000 BCE, we can postulate that the local dialectal differentiations were established by about 4000 BCE to 2500 BCE. That is when there would have been already distinctly different ways of speaking PIE that may have still been mutually intelligible. The Indo-Iranian branch was probably the first one to split off, with the Celtic one following. The Proto-Germanic languages evolved around 5th century BCE, roughly 2,500 years ago for us. Again, we call them Proto-Germanic because we can estimate how and where they were separated from the parental linguistic roots, but we have no hard evidence of what the language actually sounded like and looked like. The earliest Germanic inscriptions and runes can be dated to about 2nd century CE. The earliest roots of the English language go back to several such dialects, which arrived on the British Isles with Angles, Saxons, Jutes, and Frisians in the mid-5th century CE. So let's recap again. The Indo-European languages had their start in the ancestor language, which we call Proto-Indo-European, or PIE, that was spoken by nomadic steppe tribes approximately 6 to 8,000 years ago, by people who lived in what today is Ukraine. That was late Neolithic, early Bronze Age. We know their culture from the artifacts and burial mounds called kurgans. Gradually, Pi speakers began to disperse, probably due to the need for farming lands. Around 4 to 6,000 years ago, their dialects already diverged from the ancestral language, but were probably still mutually intelligible to a degree, or maybe not. The dispersal and change continued, and the Proto-Germanic dialects, the ancestors of the modern English language, separated enough from the ancestral origins to be identifiable on their own. This happened about 500 BCE, or 2,500 years ago. It took 1,000 more years for some of these dialects to converge in a close geographic area to form the foundations of English in the mid-5th century CE. We have now outlined the development and spread of Pi. Let us move on to section 3 to briefly discuss what other language families exist in the world today.